Hi, I'm Stephanie Rozzo. Welcome to Nature Sketch Creates Go Out and Sketch California Holly instructional video. In this video, I'll be showing you how to sketch the California Holly by applying what you learned with your step-by-step lesson. You can follow along with this lesson even if you don't have a step-by-step lesson kit. Help this tiny business by clicking the like button, subscribe to its YouTube channel, and shopping for future crates at naturesketchcrate.com. First, make sure you have all the materials you need before you go out to sketch. Go out to sketch a California holly or something similar at a park, garden, or even your home. Today I'm sketching from a cutting of a California holly. Remember, this is just a sketch. It's meant to be relaxing and fun. Take your time observing nature and painting, and don't let yourself get too caught up with accuracy. Let's get started. For consistency, I'm going to make this a little similar to the California holly step-by-step image. So I want to include some berries, so maybe just a little stem of them. So I can look at the different berry clusters and say, okay, which one do I want to include? I just want one with just a few on it. This is a pretty good berry cluster right here. And I might just go ahead and take that off so that I can paint it. And I'm going to put it in a similar position as our step-by-step just for consistency. And then I'm just going to take a few leaves too, because that's also what's included in the step-by-step. So just a little cluster of leaves. And just want a few leaves to make this quick and easy. Like this one. This one has similar kind of group of leaves to our step-by-step, so I'm going to include this one. So it's to determine how you want it placed. The easy way to do that is just to kind of move it around your page. I think that looks pretty good. There's a lot of dirt or something. And you can, on the side, include the other leaves if it fits in with your composition. And maybe move this down and add this to the side here. Maybe add a few of the other berries that I found, slightly different color variation. So actually, I do want to include this time. Maybe just to show the leaf variation. I might kind of include it like that. So I like the way that looks. I might paint a few less leaves too. So I'll take a couple of these off so I don't have to paint all of them. I'm going to move this out of the way. And then a really easy way to get this onto your page quickly to draw it is just to kind of outline around it. So hold this down and I'll just draw right around it. And you need to remember that what you're drawing is a little bit bigger than the actual leaf or the actual part of the plant that you're drawing, because you're drawing on the outside. And you want to make sure to note where all these little serrations are if you're not picking that up in your tracing here. This is very similar to the first step of your step-by-step where you trace and transfer the image. I'm just going to set that to the side so I can draw it later. So now that I have it, the outline of it, I'm going to go ahead and add the stem and some of those leaf veins and touch up the edges as well. So I have the idea of it there, I just need to draw it a little bit more. I'm going to do the same thing with the other parts here. I'm going to keep it still by holding it down with one finger while I trace it. And just a sketch, so I'm not too worried about getting anything exact. Again, just want to get an idea of this plant onto the page. These are above my paper, so I'm just drawing some quick circles, noting where they are, and just drawing in where the tops are, and I can change that a little bit. Keeping these marks light so I can change them later if needed. Just a sketch. And the way this looks might be a little bit different from your view, and it also might be a little different if I move my head or move my plants. So it doesn't move, but if you move, your view of it will change. So I'm going to set it over to the side, and then last thing, I'm going to draw on this little cluster here. It's two little berries. They're this yellowish color, just to demonstrate some variation. Set that to the side. And then I'm going to get this dirt off of here, or whatever it is. Maybe insect parts, I have no idea, maybe just the plant bark. Something I could note on the side is that I found kind of dirt particles all over this cluster. And I'm going to draw all this, but first, before I forget, I'm going to add in that it's a California holly. And you can write whatever kind of observations you have about this plant on the outside, or about what the weather was like, or how you were feeling the day you were sketching, or any observations you have at all. This is your sketch, your journal, so go ahead and add those to the outside. You do not have to stick with scientific name and common name. You can also add the date in if you like. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to use darker marks to draw in the details of this plant. So to get this middle part, I'm going to look at the plant, and it's kind of curved and then goes back down, then back up and back to a point. And I'm not going to worry too much about the exact location of the serrated edges, just that it was kind of smooth here to start, and then it has some serrations, and I'm going to go with what I traced, the outline I traced, and it might be just a little bit bigger than the leaf itself, which is okay. And I can note that on the side if I want. Leaf is a little bigger when drawn. And then I'm going to draw in these jagged serrated edges. Not really worrying too much about the exact number or exact placement or size, just kind of adding them in. One thing I do want to try to do is make sure that the vein lines are lined up somewhat correctly. So it looks like they go out towards those serrated edges here, and then come to a diamond shape right before the serrated edge, and I tend to do that throughout as far as I can see here. But I'm not going to draw in all of them. I'm just going to draw in a couple, so I can see a few of these are really apparent, especially where these two serrated edges are. I'm just going to draw them in really light. And it's not something that I'm paying special attention to. If you want, you can draw a very detailed sketch of just this leaf. I'm just going to get the overall berry cluster, so I'm going to do just a rough, quick sketch. And I'm not going to worry too much about the number of veins. I'm just going to add a few in that are really standing out. And I'll try to get it in a similar position, but it doesn't have to be exact. It's just a quick sketch. Just getting an idea of this plant. The same with these other leaves. I'm just going to get them in and not worry too much. Based on where my head is and how the light's hitting it from my angle, I'm going to add in just a few quick veins. That are most apparent. Leaving out some of the details make it a little more realistic. You're not going to see all the details anyway. Another way you can draw this is by just using some simple shapes and lines and then adding in the details like I'm doing now, rather than tracing it initially. So now that I have everything drawn in, I can use my kneaded eraser to lighten some of the marks if I want, once I get it kneaded to a light gray spot, or erase any marks that I don't like. This kneaded eraser is going to be gentle on your watercolor paper so that the paint still looks nice when you paint on it. Regular eraser might rough it up a little bit too much. So I'm going to go ahead and move on now to adding some paint. So I have my paints left over from my step-by-step lesson, but I also have my bottles of paint just in case I need them. Maybe I run out of the paint already mixed, or the paint's not vibrant enough. You can have it here. Or I need to mix a new color, so I'm adding in something unexpected. It's good to have them with you. It's also good to have the color theory with you, just in case you need a little bit of help and guidance. And I revive these paints with a little bit of water from my paintbrush inside my palette. I'm going to paint this in a similar order, or the same order in which I painted the step-by-step. So first I'm going to use the holly yellow green. It's a really wet, light version of that. And I'm going to add it to these leaves. And I can test that beforehand, but I already know that that's pretty much the color I want. And you can paint the watercolor onto the page and space a similar way that you add color using a marker. It's best to start in one space. Let's kind of move that paint through it. You need to pick up more whenever you run out of color. If you have too much color, just dab it off onto your towel. It's good to dab it off onto your towel after you pick up paint from your palette and before you add it to your painting, to control the amount of water going onto your page. And this is just a sketch. I'm not getting into all the little corners. I'm just adding it into the space real quick. And these berries don't have any green in them, so I'm not going to add that in. I guess I don't see any green color. Next, I'm going to add some of the holly red. And so I'll pick up a little bit of that wetter, lighter in our palette. So it's lighter because it has less pigment, more water in our palette. So I dab that off onto my towel, and then I'm going to add it in. So there's a little green in the stem, so I'll probably add that in a minute too. These are really red, so I'm not going to be shy about adding it in. Just add it over all those spaces. And if you need a finer tip with your brush, just roll it on your towel. And make sure to pick up more paint whenever you need it. Say the paint pigment's getting a little too light on your page. Just pick a little bit more up and dab it off on your towel and then keep on painting. There's a lot less red on those berries here, so I'm painting the stem. It's pretty red. Then I'm going to dab my brush out on my towel and check it. Looks light enough now, so there's a lot less paint pigment in my brush than there was before. And clean off my brush. And then go back. This is dry already. You can test that something's dry by just dabbing your finger over it. A little bit of that light green color at the end of the stem. And then there's some yellow in these. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of the yellow color, test it out to make sure it's right. Maybe a little bit less. So I just dabbed off some of that pigment onto my towel. And then I'm going to add it in there to these berries. And they're already dry as well. I didn't take the time to test it, but they are dry. Since I'm adding the paint without a lot of water to the paper, because I'm dabbing it off a lot of that water onto my towel, it's going to dry really fast, so you can kind of work faster and paint faster. Which is a great method for while you're out sketching nature or animals. So next I'm going to pick up the drier, darker, more concentrated holly green. It's less water added to it. From my palette, dab it off onto my towel, test it out, make sure it looks good. And I'll just look at my leaves and add it in just roughly in the spaces that I see it. And it doesn't need to be exact, just approximate. So leaving some of that lighter green color underneath. But it's mostly this very deeper, darker color, and even a deeper, darker green than this too. So I'll be adding it to most of it. And these are dry, so I'm not going to smudge them while I have my hand over it, but you can use a piece of paper to cover them up as well. Make sure you don't get anything from your hand transferred to your painting. And it's a little lighter from the light reflection on my side, so I'm letting it get really light right there. Pick up a little bit more and then add it starting on the other side. It's a little darker on the other side. I'm letting that paint pigment run out from my brush to create a little bit of a very subtle gradient. I'll do the same thing with the other leaves. not at all being exact, just adding this color in the same general space as I'm observing. It's a little lighter in the stem of the leaves, so I'm leaving that. And it has a little bit of a light reflection on the edges as well, so I'm leaving some of those edges a little bit lighter too. And these leaves overall are just way darker than that bigger leaf, as you can see. I didn't have enough paint pigment there, so I'm just adding a little bit more. While it was still wet. Clean off my brush. And check to see this is pretty dry, but I think I'm going to add the color into these berries first. I'm going to pick up this really dark concentrated red, dab it off on my towel and check it out on my paper. Looks pretty good. And I'm going to add that to the edges first. The light's reflecting on it and making some areas a little bit lighter, so I'll try to leave that. And you can even create a gradient by cleaning off your brush, then dabbing those edges while they're wet and letting it kind of bleed, letting the color kind of bleed into that wet area. This has a little bit more red. So I'm going to add some there. I'm going to clean off my brush and just add it in, letting the paint go outside of the drawing lines too. This is just a sketch. So I use the same method I use here, but with less paint pigment on my brush. And I'm going to take a little bit of this rusty color. I'm going to add it into these leaves here. Some kind of brown rusty color in this. Again, not being super exact. Some little marks from some insects. Let me add those in. And this is a little darker here. Oops. And see, I've put my hand on my berries before they were dry. I wasn't being very careful, so I left some marks, but that's okay. Little paint spatters on a sketch is totally fine. Just perfectly imperfect mistakes. So next I'm going to take this really dark green and I'm going to add it into these leaves. I'll be more careful about my berries this time since they're not dry. And these leaves are super dark, so I'm pretty much going to add them over the entire space. I'll try to preserve some of that lighter color underneath too. And I will pick up some more paint whenever I need it, whenever it gets a little too light. I started with these leaves first because they're probably going to need one more layer of that green color, so I want them to dry so that I can do them next. This leaf is not going to probably need quite as much. And I want to leave a little bit, make a little bit of a gradient right here because that's where, in my view, there's a light reflection. So I want it to be a little bit lighter right in there. to do the similar thing here. It's too light, just add more paint to it. I'm gonna dab off my paintbrush and then just kind of let that bleed over. Light reflections have these softer edges. I'm gonna paint that in really quick. And then get this gradient in as well. Not being super exact with my placement, it's just a sketch, just adding it in. This to be a little darker, I'm gonna add it right over this wet paint. Just adding more paint to the paper in that spot. Same color, just more paint pigment. And this is a little light here, so I'm gonna add just a little bit more right now. And this needs a little bit more as well. It's gonna bleed a little bit in there, which I like. Kind of showing, this is kind of mimicking that light reflection a little bit there. It doesn't have the hard edges, it has these soft edges for the light, at least from my view perspective. Maybe you think a little something different. So this is getting really low and I'm going to need some more. So I'll have to mix some more. Mixing that color is really simple. It's just the sap green. Make sure to shake it up. Add it in. Should be a nice, dark, vibrant color now. Maybe add a little bit to the stem here, which is a little darker. And then I can add a little bit of water to it in my palette. And then these leaves are just a little damp, and that's okay for this because I'm just gonna add the same color over it. And if it bleeds into the other color, I think that'll look nice. I'm gonna paint over some of this red. It's kind of a greenish red color, real dark. And then I'm gonna add in this color, which is very dark on these leaves, and I'm not seeing a lot of light reflecting off of it on this part. So I'm just going to add that in there and try to get some of that light reflection on this area though. So add this in quickly, leaving those reflected areas blank. It's still wet enough. I can go ahead and create a little bit of a gradient with a clean damp brush. Soften up some of those edges, move the paint a little bit more here. You can do a lot with the paint while it's still a little wet. So don't be shy, this is just a sketch. You should experiment. While you're doing this, a great way to learn is by just trying things out. So I'm looking at my leaf and determining where those light reflections are. There's one here in my view and right here. So I'm going to add the dark color around that quickly before it dries, and then I'm going to take a clean damp brush and create that gradient before that dries, letting that paint kind of bleed into the other areas, creating a soft gradient, very subtle. And I like the color of the leaves now. I think that works for this sketch. And I'm going to add a little bit of this darker color to some of these berries. They're kind of this deeper, rich color here on the side. Clean off my brush. And then I'm going to add a little bit of this deep red color too. I'm gonna add it to these little berries the same way I just added that other color to the red berries. I'm gonna add it to these berries a little bit more too. Some of those areas aren't quite as light as I have represented here. I'm not gonna paint on the area that's not dry yet, so I'm just adding paint around it. Darkening up those berries, but leaving some light spots as well. I'm gonna be adding just a tiny bit more here, so a little pinker. And clean off my brush. And I think I like the way this looks, so I'm gonna move on to adding some ink lines after I let this dry. So lastly, I'm going to add the ink lines. I'm gonna start with the smallest black micron, the 005. And I'm just going to redraw and redefine the lines so I can look at my reference and redraw this, or I can just redraw the lines that I have already if I can still see them once the watercolor is dried. And I'm gonna go ahead and start with this leaf at the top, just like I did before. Let's go ahead and redraw them. The paint ended up outside of where I drew the lines. I can draw the new lines on the outside, or I can just keep the paint on the outside. If I notice a detail that I'd like to change at this point, this is a good time to do that as well. So just go throughout and draw those lines. Next, I'm going to use the 01 micron to add some slightly thicker lines throughout, adding them to the stems and berries mostly. And last, I'm going to use the 08 black micron to add some thicker lines throughout around the leaves because they're so thick and leathery, and then a few lines around the berries and some on the stems as well. And I'll use it to redraw the common name. And I want to be careful not to smudge this while it's still wet. Right after I use it to draw, it can smudge a little bit. So make sure it dries to prevent that from happening. And if it does, it's okay. Just like I made a little smudge here. I think it just adds a little bit more character to the painting. Unexpected character. So right here, there's a deeper line because it's a shadow. So I might add like a double line. So I'll go ahead and add one line. That single line's kind of showing that it's a thicker, leathery kind of thing. And then I'm going to add another line, thickening that up a little bit. And kind of giving it this heavier line makes it mimic that shadow that's under that leaf, since we're not painting in shadows. And some of these areas where the light's hitting, it's a little lighter, so I could have less line there. And I might do that. Right there, kind of indicate and mimic that softer edge that light's creating. There are a lot of hard edges here in this leaf cluster. So I'm gonna just go ahead and add those in. There aren't a lot of shadows, just these hard edges, and the light's not super strong on those either. And then the berries, I'm just going to add some lines in these shadowed areas a little bit. Maybe some of the stems are a little bit heavier from the shadow, a little darker edged. So I use the 01 micron to add the lines around the berries and the stems, and to write in the scientific name. I use the 08 micron around the leaves, except for where the light was hitting it pretty drastically, to give that kind of light mimic here. And then I doubled the line where there was a deep shadow, and I added a double line here of the deep shadow as well, and left out a little bit of that 08 micron line here to mimic that light hitting it here. And then I added some lines just in the darker shadowed areas. The line variation will make it so that this really pops off the page and looks a little bit more three-dimensional, even though just adding a few lines and a few layers of ink, and it's just a very simple drawing. We're done. Great job observing your world, and keep practicing. You can keep adding more ink lines and more paint, but don't get too carried away. This is just a sketch, and make sure you let it dry in between. Finally, you'll want to add any observations or IDs or anything else that you want in the outer white area. This is your sketch. Make sure to take the time to make it yours. Thank you for joining me. Please share on a Facebook fan art page and use the hashtag NatureCreateArt to have it featured on our social media. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and check out naturesketchcrate.com to shop for future crates. Lastly, if you have any questions or like to see a certain plant or animal featured in a future lesson, please leave it in the comments below.